It's one of the president's favorite topics right now, and something Oregonians have been doing for decades. So, for everyone else trying mail-in voting this year, we'll show you how it's done. And remember when the White House said this about the Portland protests?
3 federal officers were likely left permanently blinded.
Fortunately, that's not entirely true. Let's see if the real diagnosis spreads as quickly online as the first one. And the teenager in Lake O, who got accused of driving down property values with her Black Lives Matter sign, has something to say. And she's not writing it in her window this time.
I didn't really think that everyone was going to side with me, but I was very shocked by how, open it was.
Here's the story.
Hey, everybody. I am Dan Haggerty. Welcome to the story. Got my little iPad here. Your messages go directly to this puppy right here. I can read them anytime I want. And it's really easy for you to do. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. Use Twitter in that hashtag #HeyDan, but be nice because I will get emotional during the newscast. Let's get started. And I want to start tonight by talking about the protests. Yes, there is still at this point no end in sight. And last night, we saw quite a scene during a demonstration in North Portland near the police union headquarters. You might have seen this video on Twitter, online somewhere by now. This pickup truck driving through the protests, spraying sparks as it pushed what was thankfully an empty motorcycle down Lombard Street. It's not really clear what started this, what led up to this craziness happening. We do know that the driver was stopped later by police and that person cooperated with police and no one was arrested. At least not in that situation. 3 other people were arrested later because police say people are still trying to set the union on fire. Some protesters broke into the union offices and set fires. Yes, this is still happening. And after 2 months now, a lot of people are asking, I'm asking, how is this going to end? When is it going to end? Here's what Police Chief Chuck Lavelle thinks it's going to take.
This is not a situation where you can arrest your way out of it. I don't think. We're 70 days into it, and we still have, violence taking place. Almost on a nightly basis. So I think it's really going to be a community-led effort where people just say enough is enough and we're tired of it, and we get the violent actors to stop coming out because they feel like, you know what, this is not going to be tolerated by the community.
Chief Lavelle's only been in that role as chief for 2 months now, but he's been around for a while here in town. He's been on the force for 18 years. He said he has never seen anything like this before, and he certainly has a point, I think. I'll admit a part of me thought that the arson attempts would go away when the feds did, but I guess not. That said, I think we should take a second and talk about the federal officers for a minute. I was wondering how many of you shared the news that 3 federal agents were permanently blinded after protesters pointed lasers in their eyes. Very scary, attention-grabbing stuff that fortunately isn't true. Kristen Severance takes a look at how that claim spread so quickly.
We've reported on both protesters and federal agents getting injured at the Portland demonstrations. While protesters and journalists have shared their stories about their injuries on camera, federal agents and officers have not been made available to talk to the media. We've had to rely on officials for any updates on officers getting hurt. And one claim kept getting repeated. The first time we heard it was from White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany.
And tragically, 3 federal officers were likely left permanently blinded by the rioters using lasers pointed directly at their eyes.
Then William Barr repeated it in a House Judiciary Committee.
Thrown things, used explosives, and injured police, including just this past weekend, perhaps permanently blinding 3 federal officers with lasers. We are on the defense. We're not out looking for trouble.
The claims were then repeated in Forbes and the New York Times. We asked the Department of Homeland Security for more information on the agents, who they were, how they're doing, but they never responded. Then Tuesday, Department of Homeland Security's acting deputy secretary, Ken Cuccinelli, said in a U.S. Senate subcommittee the agents were in fact temporarily blinded, that it was not permanent.
As I understand it, they're using, it's not a little pointer, it's a serious weapon that they're using potentially to cause permanent blindness in law enforcement officers. Is that right?
We've had a number of officers who had days-long blindness. So far, they've all kind of come back, if you will.
Officers have been injured at protests. Cuccinelli said at least 277 injuries have been reported on the 140 federal agents at the Marco Hatfield Courthouse. But as far as officers being permanently blinded by lasers, we can verify that is not true. For The Story, I'm Kristen Severance, KGW News.
Okay. Pause your Twitter fingers for just a second. All right, wait. I can already feel your comments about me being anti-police. That is not what this story is about. We're not trying in any way to minimize being temporarily blinded. That would be terrible, and that would be terrifying. Let me also say that just because someone is recovering from blindness or any other type of injury doesn't make what happened to them any less awful. And in this case, we're talking about 140 injured officers, 140 people. I will continue my public plea right now to talk with any of them about what has happened. Really talk to them, right? Not in a news conference or through a spokesperson or listening to them on C-SPAN. I want to sit down and talk like real people having an actual conversation. This community wants to hear from you. They need to hear from you in that way. And honestly, I can't really tell your story without you. Now, we do have an update right now from someone who will talk to us. You might remember Kristen's story from last week, journalist Tripp Jennings, who was shot in the face by federal agents with impact munitions at the protest. Tripp had to have surgery because of metal shards embedded in his eye and skin. He said the surgery went well and that he's recovering nicely. We also have an update for you on the protester shot in the head with a less lethal projectile by a federal officer last month. This is 26-year-old Donovan LaBella. He's back in the hospital, we're told, after being released last week. The organizers of his GoFundMe say that they need to put a drain back in his head, but he should be able to go home again sometime soon. Okay, big story time. Hey, imagine this, all right? You've been riding a bike for years. I mean, you're good. You're really good. You can hit the main roads, you can hit the back trails, no problem. And you tell everybody, the bike is the way to go. You gotta ride a bike. It's the best. Then you look over and you see some kid who's trying for the first time. He keeps falling off. He's got a skinned knee. He's starting to think that maybe riding a bike is starting to sound a lot more dangerous than just walking. That said, let's talk about vote by mail, the national concerns, and if our bike needs a tune-up. These are the people opening ballots in the basement of the elections office in Portland. Every vote in Multnomah County passes through this room. They've been doing it this way for more than 20 years, and suddenly it's very controversial.
Well, what I can tell you is there's no controversy in Oregon.
Oh, I guess it's not. I stand corrected. And I stood outside of the elections office with Director Tim Scott. But I'm confused. Didn't I hear this from the president last week?
A universal mail-in ballot is a disaster. These governors are going to send out millions of ballots. They don't even know where they're sending them. I already have friends. They got ballots for a son who died 7 years ago. You don't even want to talk about it. But the media knows this.
Okay, let's start there. Can dead people vote in Oregon? Well, first of all, these ballots aren't supposed to go out to dead people. The elections office gets notifications from Social Security every month, and they peruse the newspaper, just like my grandma. You have someone actually going through the newspaper?
That's correct.
They leaf through the obituaries and they check
every day.
Off names.
Every day.
Though technically, in Oregon, some of these votes could be from dead people. The ballots do go out weeks before the election.
There are many documented cases of people making their last act the act of voting. It's very possible that someone could vote their ballot and return it, and it could be counted after they've already passed away.
But that's not really the president's concern, is it? He's worried about fraud.
Well, you guys like to talk about Russia and China and other places? They'll be able to forge ballots, they'll forge them, they'll do whatever they have to do.
In Oregon, they'd have to do a lot.
This is that intelligent mail barcode.
Every ballot has a unique barcode. If you request a new ballot, the old one gets invalidated. So if yours went to an old address, no one else can use it, which would be almost impossible to do anyway.
It can be the slant that they use. It can be sort of just the motion that they use.
Because they have people checking signatures, and the one on your ballot has to match the one you used when you registered to vote. By November, the system will be automated with new tech and go through 3 steps: computer verification and 2 sets of human eyes. But the president is still worried, tweeting out a story from CBS that takes aim at USPS, arguing votes can't be counted if they never arrive.
Here's a clip from the story that's now been viewed more than 5.5 million times.
So of our 100 ballots, 97 arrived, which sounds pretty good, unless you consider the fact that that means 3 people who tried to vote by mail in our mock election were in fact disenfranchised by mail.
It's not a terrible point. The USPS is struggling. COVID hit them hard, and deliveries are way backed up. And even in good times, the mail has never been 100%. We know this. We joke about this.
They knew it wasn't me doing my route. How did they know? Too many people got their mail.
And the county admits they have no way to track the ballots that go from your mailbox to their counting rooms, or how many get lost along the way.
So it is entirely possible for something to go wrong at any stage of the process. However, if you vote your ballot at home in the privacy and security of your own home, put it in the envelope, sign it, and then drop it in one of our 24-hour secure drop sites, it's going to go straight to us. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, let's talk about the drop box. That has been the way that most people in Oregon have voted until recently, when the state made postage free, which just happened, right? It was right before the last election. And in that election, more people actually used the mail than the drop box, which was the point. But the fears around the USPS are warranted. Our election office has a full-time liaison who manages that relationship, and it's their primary concern right now, how things are changing. So much so that the Secretary of State's office plans to send out a postcard this month to absentee voters around the world to remind them to get their votes in the mail ASAP, because COVID has slowed the mail down everywhere, not just in the U.S. Now, Multnomah County says that you should mail your ballot by tomorrow for next week's special election, but postal workers are saying something else, and we think that is worth your time. Letter carriers told the Willamette Week that today is actually the last safe day to mail in your ballot to make sure it's received by Election Day. They claim management at the post office is causing delays, and that mismanagement, they say, is part of the new directives coming straight from the Postmaster General, who is appointed by President Trump. There's now a labor dispute over this, with local postal workers picketing over the new directives. Oregon has some of the highest voter turnout in the country, and our mail-in voting system is a big reason why. So, how did we get here? Well, let's go back to 1981. That's when Oregon first tested mail-in voting in local elections. By the end of the decade, the popularity spread, and most counties were voting by mail. But some elections, they still made you go to the polls the old-fashioned way, and having two different voting systems, well, kind of confused people a bit. So, in 1998, Oregon overwhelmingly passed our mail-in voting measure that required vote by mail in every election. And at the time, we were the only state to do it. Now, Oregon, as we mentioned, regularly has some of the highest voter turnout in the country, partly due to mail-in, but also thanks to the fact that every time somebody gets or renews their license here in Oregon, they're automatically registered to vote. And that's how we got here. Now, speaking of elections, Washington had its primary last night. Now, it wasn't the presidential primary, of course. That was back in March. This one was for local and state races like governor. Jay Inslee is trying to get elected for a third term, and last night he guaranteed himself a spot on the November ballot. See, the top two candidates in the primary advanced to the general election despite their political party. Inslee got more than 51% of the vote. The rest of the field was split by Republican challengers. Lauren Culp came in second with a little less than 17%. So he's going to face Inslee in November. So who exactly is Lauren Culp, you might be wondering? Well, he's the police chief of a tiny town of Republic in northeast Washington, and he's got some national attention a couple of years ago when he refused to enforce new gun laws passed by voters. He was also in the news last month when the Seattle Times dug up a 2017 lawsuit accusing him of handling a child sex abuse investigation as police chief. Culp wrote in a police report that he believed years of sexual abuse allegations by a 17-year-old girl against a male relative were, quote, made up. That relative later pleaded guilty to child molestation. In an interview, Culp said that guilty plea didn't mean the convicted child molester had actually committed a crime, just that he didn't want to spend 30 years in prison. Culp also denied mishandling the investigation. And last night, he defied the governor's orders banning large gatherings and held an election night rally in central Washington with no masks or social distancing. Here's what Culp told our sister station about it last night.
We are free Americans, and it's a personal choice. If people want to wear a mask, they can wear a mask. Article 1, Section 7 of the Washington State Constitution gives us the right. It says that no citizen shall be disturbed in their private affairs.
Governor Inslee did not hold or attend any rallies last night and watched the results in Olympia. As you can probably imagine, he's not very happy with Culp's decision to hold one.
What's important is the safety of people's lives, and to see someone who would purport to want to lead a state and ignore clear science that now is a bipartisan position in most of the country, to go backwards when vast stretches of the Republican Party even have understood the importance of wearing masks, is more than disappointing. It's an outrage that someone would purport to think they could be a leader and then lead this state into the jaws of COVID by not wearing masks. It's more than disappointing. People ought to be outraged by it.
Now, a pretty familiar name in Washington who was running for governor didn't get enough votes to make it to the November ballot. Republican Tim Eyman came in 4th place. You probably know him as a prominent anti-tax activist who's been behind a bunch of ballot initiatives for the past 20 years. But he's had his share of controversies as well. In February, a judge ruled that he concealed nearly $800,000 in campaign contributions over 7 years. Eyman denied that. Last year, he was charged with stealing a chair from Office Depot. It's on video. You see him rolling that chair right out the front door. Eyman reached a settlement in that case. The charges were dropped. He said it was an honest mistake. He thought he had already paid for it. A drunken man hurling racial slurs at a hotel clerk in Nashville turned out to be a Portland firefighter on a taxpayer-funded trip. But he wasn't fired from his job at the Fire Bureau.
I think it's really important for the public to understand these are powerful agencies.
When the story continues. Hey, welcome back. I'm just checking out some comments. A lot of people using the hashtag #HeyDan. I know you probably have your phone in your hand or nearby. If mine isn't, I get nervous. You're probably the same way. Look, tell us what you think about the show. Questions, comments, stuff like that. You can send me an email at kgwthestory@kgw.com or send me a message on Facebook or Twitter using that hashtag #HeyDan. Speaking of Twitter, last night on The Story, we told you about how Lake Oswego was trending nationally. A woman tweeted a photo of a sign that her sister painted in their family's window supporting Black Lives Matter. But she says they got an anonymous letter from neighbors asking them to take it down because it was lowering the property values on that street. The tweet went viral, and now we're hearing from the 15-year-old girl who painted that sign. She said she painted it after George Floyd was killed as an outlet for anger and frustration. We asked her how she felt when she got that letter in the mail.
I knew not everyone was going to agree with me, but I didn't think they were going to go out of their way to write a full letter and explain to me all of the reasons I should take it down. I was very shocked by how, open it was. We are, valuing our property over this statement that everyone should agree with. That was my feeling. I was like, wow.
That's Nandita. She says her family and friends have encouraged her to keep the sign up in the window, not to give in to those neighbors. She said she's getting a ton of support actually from the community and also hearing stories that are making her realize that the incident she went through has not been an isolated thing.
I've gotten a lot of positive messages. The ones that hurt the most are the ones that say, this exact thing has happened to me so many times. That hurt the most because it's I don't know, you can feel very isolated in Lake Oswego. And I'm glad that we posted it because at least people don't feel as alone as they did before. But I don't know, it just made me feel so much worse that people, this is happening regularly enough for lots and lots of people to send us letters and be like, yeah, this is what's been going on in my life. This is exactly what they said to me.
Case in point, in the replies to that viral tweet, another woman who says she lives in Portland's Selwood neighborhood says she got an anonymous letter too, demanding that she remove her Black Lives Matter sign. The executive director of the Coalition of Communities of Color says he's heard about this kind of thing happening as well.
I'd heard reports from friends of mine and colleagues who had gotten letters or in their neighborhood or next door listings with their anonymous, cowardly protests about people's signage.
How many stories like that have you heard?
At least 3 or 4.
So the Lake Oswego city managers weighing in released a statement, you see it here, says, "We stand in solidarity with his family. Everyone should be able to thrive in Lake Oswego without worrying about how the color of their skin affects their opportunities. No one should have to live with suspicion and fear of one's neighbors." The first black woman to ever lead the Portland Fire Bureau is opening up about why she let a white male firefighter keep his job. The argument for firing him boiled down to a business trip taken on the city's dime and a drunken, racist tirade aimed at a black hotel employee. Here's Maggie Vespa.
The story of, in the chief's words, mercy granted to a white firefighter by his black female boss came overnight, courtesy of the Willamette Week, who first reported this. The Portland firefighter in question is Nicholas Perkins. The paper reporting Perkins, who's not talking to the media, traveled to Nashville last summer for a conference. After a night of partying, he couldn't figure out how to use his key card to get back into his hotel. According to public records obtained by Willamette Week, that's when Perkins started yelling at a black female hotel clerk, demanding she let him in. The paper reported he used racist and sexist slurs. The hotel reported the incident to Portland Fire. Keep in mind, Perkins was traveling on the city's dime. The trip's price tag, $2,300. This happened in August of 2019.
I got an anonymous tip in June.
Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nigel Jaquist heard about the incident earlier this year after the city's investigation had played out.
And all they would really tell me was that he worked for the Bureau, what his salary was, that he had been placed on paid leave.
Officials pointed to state laws that keep disciplinary records of public safety employees private, and, frankly, to the strength of the Portland Firefighters Association, the union representing firefighters.
They rejected my public records request, which in lay terms means they just said, that's it, that's all we're going to tell you.
The Willamette Week appealed and basically said, look around.
In this moment, race is really part of almost every discussion.
They won, and out came the details. Nicholas Perkins was suspended for 6 months without pay, but will ultimately keep his job. He has to attend diversity training, as do all other Portland firefighters. That decision came from Chief Sarah Boone, Portland's first black female fire chief. She's been in that role for about a year. In a statement today, Chief Boone wrote she, quote, weighed the damage this incident had on the public trust, especially to the black community. Ultimately, she wrote, I created a discipline package based on a more restorative justice model where the road to redemption will require work and commitment from the employee. The city commissioner leading the Fire Bureau, Joanne Hardesty, told the Willamette Week she originally wanted Perkins fired, but now she agrees with the move. She said, quote, this is an opportunity to continue to shift a culture that has been dominated by white males since its inception. What we inherited is something we have an obligation to change. Jaquist has one change in mind.
I mean, I think the one thing that I found disappointing was that the Bureau was unwilling to turn over records in the first place, and I think that goes back to this culture of secrecy and insularity that the fire union and the Fire Bureau have, and that the police union and the police bureau have. It's really important that the public understands that the services that it pays for should be transparent. They should be accountable. They should reflect the city in which they work.
Maggie Vespa, KGW News.
More thing about this piece, the photo here, Nigel Jaquist pointed this out to Maggie, that in this photo of the Black Lives Matter rally organized and attended by Portland firefighters this weekend, Nigel said the firefighters couldn't speak on the record. The union and chief are handling the media with this story, but they wanted people to know a lot of them are upset about what happened and support calls for racial equity. Equality, rather, sorry. All right, hey, I'm looking through your comments. I'm working on reading words. I'm going to get better at it during this commercial break and read some of yours when we finish the story. All right, let's get through these comments. I got one from Jeff Briner. He said, important to remember, we can also get email confirmation that our vote made it through the mail and was counted. I was saying that they don't really have any system in place to see if everybody's ballots get from their mailbox to the area where they're counted, but you can specifically sign up for that. He's exactly right. So you can get an alert that says, we got your ballot, we got your vote, it has been counted. JR writing in and saying, what kind of question is, when will the protests end? It'll end when there's change, obviously. I didn't ask when the protests will end. I don't have any problem with protests whatsoever. I'm wondering when people are going to stop trying to burn down buildings. That's not protest, that's arson. Wondering when that's going to end. I think we all should be wondering that, no? And then lastly, we got this one from Hermione Slack. Instead of the sympathy for those federal officers who were not permanently blinded by protesters, how about the lies from people like William Barr? We played those sound bites when they were talking about the potential of them being permanently blinded. William Barr didn't lie about that. He used the word potentially, which is an important one that a lot of people did not use when they shared that. It's about what people are sharing online. You need to be careful about what you say. That's why we always push that so hard here on The Story, to be careful about the power of words. We'll keep trying to do our best to remember that. And I think you should too. Thanks for being with us tonight. That's The Story. We'll see you back here tomorrow.